Random art tips and rambles with Rafi.
Hola, you amazing artists. It's Rafi.
And Klee.
And today we're going to talk about actually an experience that we just had recently where we gave a talk in front of a bunch of kids.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was what, like 120 kids?
It was 120 art students at a school.
A lot of people ask me what it's like to talk about your art in public. In fact, when we first started the Patreon page, one of our first patrons was curious because they had a presentation that they were supposed to give at their first art show.
That's
Remember?
right.
He was really nervous about that and wanted to know, like, oh man, so what kind of things do I talk about? I'm pretty introverted. I don't really talk in public that much.
Yeah, and I can relate to that because speaking in front of groups, I'm generally pretty scared.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. It's funny because I am actually very, very comfortable speaking in front of a large group. Well, you did pretty well at the presentation. You did pretty amazing.
Oh, that was my first time speaking in front of kids, and there was something really wonderful and exciting and more comfortable about that.
So, given that speaking in front of people is petrifying to you, what kind of advice would you give somebody who is that has to speak about their work? I know that one of the questions we get from people talking in public about their art is, let's say at the market.
Yeah.
You know, like somebody walks into your art booth and they want to talk to you. What kind of things do you say? I get a lot of people that ask me like, well, what do you say? And, you know, my response is like, hi. You know, just say hi. Yeah,
one of the things I've definitely learned from experience is to just be who you are. If you're a man of few words or a woman of few words, just be that. Just speak authentically about your personal opinions and your experience. So, like, I like to talk about rocks a whole lot. So if you come see me and you're looking at my jewelry, chances are I'm going to talk to you about what I find fascinating about stones and metals.
Right. And I think the difference is that you don't concern yourself that much anymore with whether or not they're interested in hearing about rocks. You want to talk about what it is that you're interested in talking about.
Yeah, and if they don't want to hear about it, they usually just peace out on me.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that that's what makes it so nerve-wracking. It's like, well, what do I say? What if I'm not interesting to them? What if they get bored by what I have? What if they think that I'm stupid? Mm-hmm. And I think that when it comes to talking to people in public, and if you're asking yourself those questions, you're going to drive yourself nuts because you have no idea. There's all kinds of different people that are going to walk into the booth, and some people you're going to relate to, and some people you're not.
Yeah, some people are going to find you exceedingly boring, and some people are going to be totally enthralled by what you have to say.
So it's just a matter of being okay with that.
Yeah, and the thing about it is that in all situations, if you're just speaking your truth, then you don't have to worry about coming across in any kind of weird way. I used to try to like pre-plan what I was going to say when I knew we were going to be talking in public. Right. And that actually made me more nervous. Now, I'm not saying don't prepare. Like we had bullet points that we knew we were going to talk about.
Right. But it wasn't broken down into specifics.
It wasn't scripted because then there's this whole extra addition of like trying to remember what you pre-wrote. And if you can't remember, then there's like fight or flight mode kicks in and you panic.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's one of the reasons that I don't script the YouTube videos because a lot of times like I'm on a roll answering those questions. And I thought about it a while back because I used to script the YouTube videos and it increasingly got more and more difficult for me. I realized that when somebody walked into the art booth that they were an artist and they had a question for me, I wasn't speaking from a rehearsed script. I was just speaking from the heart.
Yeah, you're just talking to them.
Now, when you're in front of a large group, you still don't have that one-on-one going on, but you can always single out a few people where you're watching their body language and their expressions and seeing how it is that they're responding to the things that you're saying.
Yeah, and one thing that you are really great at is asking the audience questions so that they can actually respond to what you're saying.
Right.
And there is a reciprocation there. I'm just now kind of recently realizing that when you're talking about yourself, your career, your experiences, you can't get that wrong.
No.
Because you're just telling a story. So you don't have to be afraid of like whether you're going to botch it up.
Yeah, and you're telling your story. So whichever way it is that you decide to tell your story, that's the right way. And you can't get it wrong. And even if you say something and it's incorrect, in that very moment you can say, oh, wait a second, no, I didn't mean that, I meant this. And you could change that story up.
Yeah.
And when you're talking to somebody about your work, you're talking about your opinion and your perspective on the work. You're not talking about how they're supposed to see it.
Yeah, and I think a lot of us get all befuddled and confused and scared, wondering how we're going to come across to someone else, how they're going to interpret what we're saying, whether or not what we're saying is going to be pleasing or exciting to them, and what they're going to walk away with. And really, that's totally out of your control.
Yeah, it is. It is totally out of your control. I've had videos where they have gotten completely two different opposite responses, where somebody will take what I said and say like, oh, thank you so much for that. It made me feel empowered. And then somebody else will take the same thing that I said and take it personal and think that I meant it as an attack. And honestly, I can't concern myself with that. I try to come across as clearly as I can for myself to say what it is that I want to say. But I have no control over whether somebody takes what I say and it goes through their filter in their own brain. You know, it has to go through that brain cavity of theirs and bounce around in there. And then it becomes whatever it is that they think it becomes. But essentially, the words that are coming out of my mouth remain the same. Mm-hmm. The meaning happens once it bounces around the brain cavity.
Kids are especially interesting to talk to because they don't really have like a censorship in place. So like when they're bored, they're very blatantly bored. When they have questions, they very blatantly have questions. They'll tell you whatever they're thinking.
Yeah.
So they're actually really a great audience.
They are really a great audience. The interesting thing about this particular show was that there were kids that were younger and then there were older kids in the back. Usually if I'm talking in front of a large group of kids and they're all around the same age and they're younger, I'm a little bit more interactive with them because I know that their attention, they could get bored easily with me if I'm like, you know, just blah, 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 blah about, oh, adulty stuff. Oh, more adulty stuff. You know, like they don't care about that stuff. The questions that they ask are like, what kind of things inspire you? What's your favorite color? You know, like that's what they want to know. So like you want to communicate with them in an excited way where you're really feeding off of them and going back and forth with them more at the level that curious, free level that kids are at.
Yeah.
When you're dealing with older kids or adults, you're going in for a much more guided type of connection. You know, they're going to have their questions. They're going to have things that they're interested in talking about. They're going to want specifics about a certain experience.
Yeah.
They're not going to get bored with that part of it because they're more concerned about the how-to. How do you deal with this and how do you deal with that?
Getting a deeper understanding on a specific topic.
Yeah.
So engaging with a room that had both older kids and very young kids was an interesting dynamic.
It was. My brain had to keep switching between one mode and the other.
Yeah.
Because I'd be talking to like one of the older kids who asked, you know, like a more serious question.
Yeah, like what do you do when people make presuppositions about you based on the fact that you're pursuing an art career?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. The only problem is that the younger kids were squirming after I was into the question for about 4 minutes, you know, because they're like, we don't care. We don't even know what you said, you know, so like... And that was the thing. It's like bouncing back and forth between that and then the little kids. Now, me personally, I would prefer to talk to little kids separate than to older kids because it's a completely different dynamic when you're engaging with the audience. But then again, I did the art talk in front of the other group, and these were mostly older, much older people.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because their questions were very much about the process. They were more interested in the process of how do you do this? How do you do that?
Yes.
It was very specific. But there is a freedom that comes with the questions that happen with younger kids. They're a little bit more unpredictable. Mm-hmm. They're much more curious. They are ready to ask you a question out of left field and then be completely uninterested in whatever answer you have for them.
Yeah, they're tiny creative geniuses,
Yeah.
and they're also little sponges.
Exactly. So with younger kids, it's more along the lines of like inspiration. When I deal with younger audiences, I want to be able to inspire them and plant an idea in their mind that is going to contradict the negative ideas that might pop up in their mind in the future.
Yeah, and I really like that idea of taking the inspiration, the seed planting, and possibly even implementing that when talking to older, more seasoned, possibly cynical grown-ups.
Oh yeah,
as well.
Absolutely. Because the thing is, when you're dealing with older, cynical people, they're going to have their comments, and the way that you plant the seed with them is with humor. Yeah. Like you basically take that negative comment that they might have, and then you make a joke out of it and you turn it around. And you could see that I did that when the lady criticized my artwork in the middle of the talk.
Yeah, absolutely. The humor helps break down those barriers, or sheer excitement.
Yeah.
So like, I love when people come to see me and you can see they're like looking at my work with a scrutinous eye, but they're enjoying it. And I'm like, did you know that all the gold in the entire world was forged in the hearts of supernovas billions of years ago, and then deposited on Earth? And that's the only way you can form gold. And they were like, whoa,
yeah,
we didn't know that.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's like that curiosity and that fun. Obviously, it's easier when you're dealing with a younger audience because you are dealing with people that are already inherently curious and fun, and they're not cynical yet. But I think that no matter what, it is that fun, that curiosity, that spontaneity, that love, and just honesty, just authenticity when you're talking is what seems to get through to just about any single audience. So I think that whether or not you're talking in a booth, or you're talking at your own solo show, or you're talking in front of a room of hundreds of people, what's most important is that you just keep smiling, have a good time, and just be authentic. Be who you are.
If you're awkward, be awkward. If you're nerdy, be nerdy. If you're silly, be silly. Just be who you are. I even like to say sometimes, like, I'm slightly awkward and pretty nerdy, so like, just so you know what you're signing up for.
Yeah, absolutely. I absolutely agree. I think that is something that you need to own because it is part of you. It is part of being authentic. Getting up in front of a room if you're feeling nervous and saying, I'm going to be honest with you guys, I am very nervous right now getting up in front of a room and talking to you guys. It is something that I am afraid of, and so I'm going to face this fear. And you are coming along for this crazy ride with me.
Yeah, and it lets them know that, like, you're on the same level. Like, you're not talking at them, you're engaging. And so it makes it's a comfort level. It's a rapport you can establish by just being who you are.
I think a lot of this fear gets developed in school, honestly, because you get put on the spot. Maybe you're having a day where you don't feel like getting up. You don't really know anybody. And they're like, Klee, we need you to read paragraph 5 through 6, and then you have to stand up and read.
I used to dread that with everything in me. And even in speech class in school, you get up and you give your speech and you're given a grade on how you did. And there's a right way and a wrong way to present a speech. And sure, they're teaching you the fundamentals of public speaking, but it can really do a lot of damage if you take that stuff personally and you just think you suck, which was my case in school.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, very few teachers, some teachers are going over the fundamentals of public speaking, but a lot of teachers are not covering the fears of public speaking.
No.
And actually using it as a very empowering course. Now, I was lucky enough that in high school, somehow I ended up in a speech class. I don't know why. It would not have been a class that I would have wanted. I would have never wanted to get up in front of anybody and talk. But somehow I ended up in a speech class. And it just so happens that the teacher that I had for that speech class was phenomenal. It wasn't about, you need to get up and do this, and everything was just a textbook course. It was about personal empowerment. It was about sharing your ideas. And he didn't coddle us, but at the same time, he made sure that the feedback that he was giving us was feedback about our confidence. Well, you're going to feel more confident if you do this. You're going to feel more confident if you think about it in this way. And so he was great for public speaking. Now, even when I was in high school, even after that class, you could not get me to stand in front of a group of people unless now they were in my speech class. But eventually it really started to help me in life. Well, when I had different jobs and different positions, when I was a corporate trainer, I had to stand in front of hundreds of people and talk about things for hours. And so that a lot of the fundamentals that I learned and a lot of the ways that I learned about how I handled myself, I learned from the speech class.
That's awesome. My speech class experience was not that. It was mandatory, and it was very textbook, and it dealt with not emotions whatsoever. Just what you do and how you do it.
And that's so freaking ridiculous to me. It's like, if you are going to have some, first of all, that is one of the things that most Americans, most people around the world are afraid of.
Yeah,
is
it goes
public
like
speaking.
Death and then public speaking.
Yeah,
right?
It's like public speaking. And if you're going to make a class mandatory and you are not going to teach people how to face those fears, individually too, because everybody has a different fear of why they're afraid to public speak.
Yeah.
And it's one of the other issues that I have with school, with the school system and different things like that everything needs to be graded unless you're grading these fundamentals that don't apply across the board. Like, what are we teaching? Just a bunch of robots to speak in a certain way?
Right.
Or are we teaching people to be individuals and to get out there and speak in their voice and speak their authentic self? Or is it public speaking as in like, here's the speech that you prepared. Now you got to speak it. You got to memorize the speech and then speak it in front of the class. That's not public speaking.
Right. And I remember like some of the parameters was like, it needs to be 15 minutes long. You need to have a visual diagram of what you're talking about, and you need to cover 3 points.
Yeah.
That's the kind of thing we were given.
Yeah. And that's what you get graded on.
Yeah.
But that's not going to help you in life.
Not whatsoever.
No, because if you are going to speak in front of a group of people, it is usually something that is going to be original to you, unless you're in like some kind of corporate environment or you're some in politics where you need to read something and you need to memorize it. When you are doing public speaking, it is the ability to confidently stand up there and communicate your ideas, not just reading out of some textbook or reading some notes that you put out. Like it is public. And I think that that's the problem, is that a lot of people are used to that if they're going to speak in front of a group of people, that they have to rehearse whatever it is that they're going to talk, because the last experience that they had in public speaking was in school when they had to memorize something in order to say it in front of a class.
Yeah. The rehearsal and you've got to rehearse it. You've got to have it down, and you have to try to be something you're not. You have to try to be better than you are. You have to try to be fearless and charming and blah, 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 blah,
right.
blah.
They talk to you about charisma and different things like that, but they don't actually explain
how that works.
You have charisma when you're yourself and you're willing to joke around about the topics that you're talking about, because you're willing to not take yourself so seriously. That's what it means to have charisma.
Exactly.
That kind of thing is enchanting when you're having a conversation with somebody and they're not sitting there all stuffy with the paper roll up their butt because they have these topics that we are covering and this is what I'm going to read to you. Like, right. You're just having a conversation with somebody who's speaking to a bunch of people. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's what it comes down to. Like, whether or not it is a small thing, whether it's one-on-one or it is in front of a large group of people, just be yourself. Just get up there and talk about the things that you want to talk about. Just communicate your story. Talk about things that you already know, things that you're comfortable talking about. Don't come up with stuff and think that you have to, I got to find things and memorize them in order to make myself seem interesting. You're already interesting as it is. Just talk about the things that you know and that you're interested in.
Yeah. So when I first got started engaging with people, I thought like, I have to get magazines and keep up on the trends and know who the important designers are so that I can like talk the talk, the jewelry rhetoric, if you will. But like, honestly, I'm not all that interested in that stuff.
No.
So like, That got tossed out the window pretty
Yeah,
quickly.
and you know what's interesting about that is that there are people, I've met people that make sure that they keep up on the trends, and they're going to talk about this and blah blah. And when we get into a room and we're going to discuss something, I want to discuss what the new trends are. Hey, did you hear about blah blah blah? That blah 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 is doing this now with the art world. I've had so many people come and tell me things. I'm like, no.
Didn't catch that one.
Tell me all about it. Let's have this conversation. Like, I don't need to be the trendy one. I don't need to keep up with anybody else's art. Now, a lot of times I find interesting things that I read because I find them interesting.
Right.
And the only reason that I retain the information is because I found it interesting to begin with.
Exactly.
But there are so many other things that I've read that I'm like, I don't care. And that goes
Moving on.
Yeah, I'm not going to talk about that to anybody.
Yeah, so ultimately, be yourself. And here's the good news and bad news, all wrapped up nicely with a bow. The only way to really get comfortable with public speaking is to force yourself to do a fair bit of it.
Yeah.
You can't really get your footing any other way.
Yeah, and the thing is that you're going to experience different ways of being afraid of it. Some people are just going to feel a little bit of anxiety. Some people, their knees are going to buckle or shake. There are different ways that you are going to experience a fear of public speaking or getting out in front of somebody. The thing is that if you are feeling any of those physical things, it's starting in your brain. It's starting in your mind. You're turning it into this thing where it's completely just a terrifying experience.
Yeah, so you've already gotten yourself worked up there.
So, like, if you are experiencing that, it's because you've turned it into a life and death scenario. I don't know how many times I've heard people say, like, oh man, if I say the wrong things, I could just die. Like,
oh, yeah.
You're not going to die, you know, and if people are going to laugh at me, so what? Laugh with them. Like, just have fun. Get up there. What is the worst thing that could happen? What is the worst possible thing that could happen when you're up there speaking?
Something embarrassing happens and ideally you laugh it off.
Yeah, you just laugh it off.
Because you're human. And if anyone's expecting you to be more than human, that's their problem.
Yeah, and chances are nobody's expecting you to be more than human. First of all, anybody that is sitting in the audience is understanding where you're coming from when you're up there, especially if you're being authentic and you've already told them, like, yeah, I'm really nervous standing in front of a room of people. Like, they know that because the 90% of them are afraid of standing in front of a room and talking in front of people. Now, if you have that idiotic critic where you get that one troll that happens to be in the audience who's like, oh, you didn't do a good job, you know, whatever it is that they're going to say, who gives a shit?
Yeah.
That is, you know, like Brene Brown says, you know, it's like Theodore Roosevelt's thing about
the man
in the arena. You've got the critic that's standing on the sidelines. He's not in there. He's not in the arena. He's got no right to say anything at all. So, like, a lot of times that's why people are afraid to get out there and put themselves out there and put their voice out there, not only in public speaking, but in sharing your artwork, sharing your music, whatever it is that you want to do. You're afraid to do it because you're afraid that you're going to get criticized or that somebody's going to make fun of you or somebody's going to say something stupid. And the fact of the matter is that if they're not in there with you, then they could go eat a fucking bowl of farts. I don't care. Like, if they're not in there, if they're not in the arena, the fact of the matter is that anybody that does any degree of public speaking or speaking out in public and stuff like that, if they see that you're struggling, they're not going to criticize you. They're going to come to you and say, hey, you know what I do usually to help me with my nerves or blah, blah, blah. They're going to actually talk you through the situation and they're going to give you some much needed advice, if anything. But they are not going to criticize you. Anybody that criticizes you is not putting themselves out there, is not doing anything that is of any worthy note whatsoever. Because anybody that is doing something worthy in their life, man, they're in the arena.
They know what it's like.
They know what it's like to be in the arena. So they're not going to sit there and criticize their fellow gladiators that are in the arena who are putting themselves out there despite the fact that they're scared to do it. Mm-hmm. Never will that happen. And that's it, you guys. Hopefully you guys found this subject helpful. It's one of those questions that we get all the time where people are like, oh, they asked me to speak in front of my solo group, or I'm about to open up and do a booth and I'm not really sure how to talk to people and things like that. And this pretty much covers a lot of those questions that you guys had, whether you are doing a big giant event and you're speaking in front of 120 kids, or you're speaking one-on-one at an art show. It's all the same thing. It's just about being authentic, being yourself. You don't have to sell anybody on anything. You don't have to make it seem like you're more than you are, because you're already pretty damn awesome. So that's what it comes down to. Just be you and have a good time. Have fun with it. Laugh at yourself, laugh at them. Just have a good time.
Yeah. And it'll get easier and easier.
Would you say it's gotten easier and easier for you?
Yes. This past speaking thing that we did was the best that I've ever felt. I felt the most comfortable. And it's getting easier and easier.
Yeah, it looked like you were having a good time.
I did indeed have a good time.
And that's it, you guys. I'm interested in hearing about any speaking things that you have gone through, or anything that you actually have coming up in the future where maybe you're a little bit afraid, or where you were afraid in the past, and how you handled that and where you're at now. I'd love to hear any stories that have to do with public speaking, either one-on-one or in front of large groups of people. And thank you so much for listening, you guys. You guys are absolutely amazing. I totally adore you. And if you like this and you want to listen to more like this, just click somewhere around here to subscribe, and you can listen to more of Klee and I. And that's it. Say goodbye, Klee.
Good day, everyone.
Adios.